Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Freedom Fest 2016, live from Planet Hollywood, Las Vegas, Nevada. You're listening to the SHR Media Network. Sit with us right now, back for a second year in a row with us, which is always nice to have return guests.
That's right.
And a man we had a blast with last year when
Thank
we were
you.
on the air and off the air, Mr. Bob Bowden from choicemedia.tv. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Sean. Great to be back. I only came because I knew you would be here. So I said, I need to come back to Vegas.
Can you do me a favor and tell the organizers of Freedom Fest that, please? 'Cause I will send them this clip, so
Really?
I just want you to back it up.
Okay. All right. And the 100 people I brought with me, just because of Sean, all of whom paid the fee.
How's everything going with the fine work you guys are doing over there?
Well, it's always, 2 steps forward and 1 step back in the world of education reform and school choice. We have many millions of dollars aligned against us that teachers' unions spend every election cycle to elect candidates who will quash school choice, put caps on charter schools, extend tenure so bad teachers can't be fired short of a felony conviction in a lot of traditional district schools.
And even then, they just get put into an administrative position sometimes.
Exactly, yeah, or shuttled off to a rubber room where they don't have to do any work. Yeah, something like that.
In other words, living the dream.
That's right. It's good to keep a sense of humor.
Oh, you
I'll
have
say
to
that.
at this point. You have to, especially when it comes to education.
Right.
We actually talked about this with our last guest and how the education system has become so jaded and just really kind of a house of cards and smoke and mirrors all at the same time.
Right.
Where parents believe they're getting a quality education until it's too late. And then all of a sudden, you have a kid who's maybe 13, 14, you realize not everything's working now.
Right.
And as far as, I love the charter school idea. We've talked about it a bunch of times. And my partner's kids go to charter school. And it's something that I still don't think enough people in this country know about.
Sure. There are states that don't have any.
Yes. And it's ridiculous because I follow the trends and you read the reports. The charter schools are producing children who are far more educated, far more prepared for the world, and really financially, even as a taxpayer or not, as some people aren't, it's way more cost-effective than the public education system is. And can you explain why the charter schools are working so well? And I think a lot of it comes down to the educators, obviously.
Sure.
But why the educators in charter schools are more effective than those in traditional public schools?
Well, first thing to understand is charter schools they're a marketplace. There's lots of different people who can open them and run them, and it doesn't mean that they're all great, right? So like in any marketplace, there are better and worse providers. So an anecdote of a particular not-so-great charter school, sometimes the opposition will point at that and say, look, obviously charters aren't working. Look at this one bad school, or look at this one example. I mean, there are thousands in the country. So I just want to say that. Mm-hmm. But overall, yes, charters perform better. The Credo study at Stanford University showed that, for example, low-income black kids in charter schools have an average of 36 more instruction days of math every year they're in a charter school compared to those exact same kids, all demographically controlled, if they were in a district school. So, so in general, charters outperform it. But you don't have to argue for everyone. It's a marketplace. So you and me and someone else could come up with an idea for a charter school. It could be a great idea. We could create one that focuses on dual language instruction or science and math, STEM education, or dramatic arts charter school, or we could come up with a charter school for autistic kids, or a charter school for a high disciplinary environment for kids that need that, or we could come up with lots of ideas. We may come up with a bad idea,
right.
And that charter school could start, and then over time it would go away, like
Ford
else.
developed the Edsel. Not everything's a winner.
Indeed. But overall, charter school. I mean, this November, Massachusetts is going to have a statewide referendum over eliminating its cap that right now stops the growth of charters. Mm-hmm. Why do they have caps? Because there's so much demand. So many parents, they wouldn't need a cap if there weren't so many parents clamoring to get their kids in more charter schools, right?
And it's very true. And so I was living in Massachusetts when the ideas of charter schools first started developing, and one of the first ones in Massachusetts was in the city I was living in called Malden. And It was amazing to see the gravitation after that. The first to second year, everyone was like, oh, charter school, is that where the crazy kids go? Like, there was no understanding, and that really was the rumors that, oh, that's for kids who are having a hard time in public school, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, in the last 10 years, the line's out the door, the success rate's through the roof, and a lot of it comes down to free market.
Exactly. It's competition.
Yes.
And so while charters aren't completely free the way private schools are to do anything they want, they have charter authorizers. They're still government schools. In a sense, it's government money that goes to them, so there are a lot of regulations. There's not as many regulations, at least, and you can innovate the curricula in ways you can at regular schools. And so, so the charter schools started 25 years ago. So it's the silver anniversary. In Minnesota was the first charter school law that was passed. We just made a film for the National Charter School Alliance that premiered last month at their conference in Nashville. And when it first, you can just look at that graph. We have in the film we did, there's not one year where there are fewer charter schools than the year before. There's first, dozens more each year, then hundreds more each year, then thousands more each year.
That's amazing.
So there's a continuous growth.
And and the end result is the actual turnaround. You're starting to see far better education numbers come out of these charter schools. And I believe the hope was at some point that it would start to force public schools to change how they would, and it hasn't happened, which just amazes me. It's seriously like, you stand in there and you watch them, you're like, when are you going to catch up? Because they just surpassed in 25 years what you guys have been doing for 75.
Right.
And
still full. The traditional district schools are still full of all these work rules where the teachers don't have to work beyond this time each day, and they get X number of sick days each year. They're districts where virtually all the teachers take all their sick days.
Contracts.
Because we've done this. We have Freedom of Information Acts on certain districts, not all, but certain districts where, a sick day is not supposed to be the same as vacation, right? It's supposed to be if you're actually sick.
Right.
But there are districts where all the teachers treat the sick days as vacation days. In charter schools, it's the opposite scenario where the only reason people are there in the first place is they are excited about an idea, about a different way to teach kids. It's mission driven. They're all signing up for that mission to be there in the first place, the kids and the teachers.
Well, and I think one of the things, we talk about unions on our show a lot, just how they affect the country in general, but especially our education system. Unions, and you look at Detroit, you look at Chicago, New York is another one, and I'm sure the list goes on. You look at what unions have done, and the same thing unions have done to the auto workers and Detroit as far as the finances and just ripping the money out of these companies, and then wonder why they have to lay people off. It's kind of done the same thing to public education, where it's being billed as, hey, you know what, you'll never have to really work another day in your life again. They can't get rid of you after you hit your tenure point. You're going to get incremental raises. You're going to get, like you said, all these days off and the summer off and get paid for it for the most part. And it goes on and on and on. And we talk about socialism and how it just destroys initiative in people. And it's that same mentality of, well, if I don't have to produce, then why would I want to?
Right.
Because why would I work hard on the guy next to me or the gal next to me when we're getting paid the same?
Right. So this is an anecdote I've given before. I might have given it last year, but in L.A. Unified, there was a teacher, Mark Burnt, who was a pedophile, serial pedophile. Even this guy was paid $40,000 by the Los Angeles School District to quit.
Yes.
While he was on trial,
right,
for molesting children.
Because the union
they paid to quit.
Yes.
$40,000 because they said to hire the lawyers to actually get him fired would cost the district way more money, like six figures. Instead, they could pay him $40,000 and he'd quit. Imagine if you're just an ordinary lousy teacher, or you kind of phone it in, or you don't try that hard, but you're not a pedophile. You're just sort of
you're just flying under the radar.
You're just under the radar. They're never going to even worry about you. They're never going to look at you, right? You have a guaranteed job for life. And that's why if anyone listening right now can type in nationsreportcard.gov and see that only 1/3 of our 8th graders are proficient in both reading and math, according to the 2015 so-called NAEP test, which is the U.S. Department of Education gives all 50 states. 1/3 of our kids are proficient, and that's where we are right now. And we have a fifth of our kids, 20%. Who don't even finish high school.
Right.
So imagine your job prospects in an increasingly technological 21st century, if people say that these days a bachelor's degree isn't even enough, people are needing master's degrees and whatnot. Imagine not even having a high school degree, and what kind of career in life you might have in today's world.
What was the term? The phrase from Caddyshack? The judge said, "The world needs ditch diggers too, son," and that's the unfortunate reality.
Right.
But that brings me up to actually two different points. And one of the things personally, I was lucky enough to go to a vocational school.
Great.
Growing up.
Which is growing.
And
the movement is
and
growing.
And people still thought for some reason that was a discipline. They don't realize it was actually harder for me to get into the regional one than going to a traditional high school. And, we look at, I'm sure you know Mike Rowe and Mike Rowe Works.
Certainly.
And I think that is something I've said for years. The education I got at the vocational school, which I didn't really I used for a few years afterwards and went to a different career. But one of the
You were not in the talk show division of the vocational
No, it was
school?
really weird. I was actually in carpentry. And it wasn't so much, obviously I learned from some amazing teachers that were carpenters for years and teachers secondary. So there was they didn't care about tenure or anything like that. These guys had more money being carpenters than they did being teachers, but they actually wanted their craft to be passed along.
I bet.
But one of the things that I always took out of that was a work ethic, because for a whole week you were building on a site. The next week you would do your education. You were building on a site, education. But also how to actually work as a team member.
Exactly.
At a young age. Be respectful to the quote-unquote foreman or the authority, but not be treated like we weren't treated like children from freshmen on. We were building houses. I built 4 houses before I graduated high school, and I actually learned how to do so appropriately. But it prepared me with a work ethic. It prepared me to understand that, hey, sometimes you have the worst job some days you have the best job. Things change around. And I think that we're coming up with great ideas for charter school. You mix with what Mike Rowe's saying and putting out numbers about our tradesmen are retiring quicker than we're replacing them, and then you look at the charter school push, I think there's a marriage there somewhere that could greatly benefit this country and the youth. As far as education goes, kids are so pushed for the last 15 years of, if you don't go to college, you're not going to do anything. Well, you don't realize the average plumber makes 5 times more than somebody with a bachelor's degree in underwater basket weaving.
Oh, please. The college bubble is on the precipice, on the cusp of exploding, of bursting.
Finally.
Right now. It really is. These kids who graduate with 6-figure college debt and they end up with a degree, especially if it's a below-average school, let's just call it that, and it's a degree that's not the least bit marketable. It's not something like nursing or engineering,
right,
or something that, that is pharmacy, something you can get a job in. It's something like film studies or
art.
It's art history.
Yes.
It's those degrees with all that debt. It's, I don't know. It's
you're paying $350,000 for an art degree.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, hey, I don't know what you think you're going to sell to make that up.
Yeah.
But if you could give me a large coffee, that would be great. And I don't mean that.
To a lot of them, too, they think, this is a pre-law degree. I'm going to go to law school and I'll be rich.
Right.
And so then what happens, right? They either never get into law school or they go and they're not rich, right? Because that's that people have seen too many TV shows.
Or you become an attorney, which is not always the better thing either. And my brother-in-law, who's an attorney who listens, will probably smack me for that later, but that's all right. I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
What do you guys got coming up in the future to help essentially the youth of this country become leaders? What do you guys got coming up? So
we have a daily newswire I want to tell people about. It's choicemedia.tv. It's also on Twitter at choicemediatv. We're about to release, and I can't give too many details, but we have a whistleblower teacher who's come to us and is telling the story that she didn't want to pass along these kids to the next grade because they didn't have command of the material. In fact, they couldn't read. They were illiterate. She did not want to just say, you're a year older, off you go, wash my hands of it, everything's fine. Turns out her principal said, no, you're passing these kids.
I've heard these stories before.
Right. They're chilling. They're chilling stories.
It's frightening.
And she ended up fighting him on that. He exacted retribution against her, removing supplies from the classroom, textbooks from the classroom, things that hurt kids. He did to punish her for wanting to hold back these kids so that they could read before going on to the next level. So we're going to be releasing that in a week or two.
It's absolutely unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, what happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic? I mean, And I think that's where public schools have gone awry as well, is they've become these social mentors. They become these people who teach morals, all the stuff that should be done at home, because there's this guise of, yeah, exactly. All these other theories, because everyone's pushing out there, well, parents aren't doing their job, so the school has to do it. And I've argued with teachers. I said, it's not your job to teach my kids morals. That's my job.
Right.
Reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and history.
And they're not even learning those things.
And they're not even studying them half the time anymore. They're studying all these other ridiculous things, earth sciences and blah, blah. Listen, you teach basic science, and then when my kid gets old enough to go to college, if they want to study this, that, or the other thing, they can, or don't. You know what I mean? Hold on. The underground professor has something he needs to say.
He needs to be on mic. Oh,
yeah, he can't help himself.
Mic on mic. I'm a professor.
Yes, you are.
I teach at a junior college, so I teach the first 2 years. And my entire job is to teach kids what they should have learned somewhere in high school so that they can go to college.
What subject do you teach?
Government and history.
Okay.
And it is sad because they get there and they don't even know we have a republic, let alone what kind of government we have. They don't know any of our history.
Well, they think republic's a store.
Right, yeah.
That's
New
the
Republic.
problem. Yeah, they're like, oh, no, go to the Banana Republic.
They're in there with their Che Guevara shirts.
And they think it's amazing.
Yeah, right.
But and that's the product you see coming out of high school now, and that's the problem. They don't understand history. There's no grasping it, because the things that are actually important, we just talked about this with our last author who was on, is history gets changed. What our country actually is gets adjusted. I mean, we've seen textbooks where they're talking about the Second Amendment means that the government can bear arms. That's what they've dumbed it down to.
Sure.
When they talk about 9/11, they're teaching these kids that it was almost like a group of thugs that did this. There's no history.
Yeah, terrorism for the Boston Tea Party.
Right,
That's
exactly.
how they describe it, in Texas.
So the same Nation's Report Card shows U.S. history proficiency of 8th graders is 18%. 18% of U.S. high school kids or 8th graders are proficient in U.S. history.
I thought that would be high. You ought to see what the study is for professors of history and how proficient they are. It's probably not much better. This is why they don't want testing in these schools for teachers. Yeah.
Bob, I only have a couple minutes left. Thank you so much for joining us. I want people to follow choicemedia.tv. Follow them on Twitter as well.
Thank you.
Learn about charter schools.
And also private school choice programs, which are being proliferating around the country, but are being fought anywhere that they're pursued, including the state we're in right now, Nevada.
Yeah, and
where there are lawsuits to stop the Education Savings Account program, which is essentially money directly to parents if they choose to opt out of the public schools.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that those exist in some states as well. They think that they have to pay their taxes and... Yeah, and there's a million different options, but look at your options. Find out what better suits you, but more importantly, what's better for your child.
Yeah, let me leave you with this. We were interviewing this girl who had just left and gone to a Catholic private school. The first K through 9, she was in the public school. She started telling the story about the daily abuse she would get. She says these girls who hate you, there's no way to get away from them, and every day you've got to go back in. She starts to cry and weep on camera as she's telling us the story of the just ritual abuse and vicious just treatment she got from these like mean girls who were in the school. And then she said, but now she has a second chance at life. Mm-hmm. You know, a 15-year-old girl describing
I've seen
a second
that interview.
chance of life.
I have seen that interview. And then maybe I caught it off of your page.
Could be.
But, yeah, no, it's amazing. And a lot of kids, and you've seen these stories and heard these stories time and again, it's just changing the school that they're in.
Yes.
And all of a sudden they flourish amazingly.
Yes.
And, I'm sure there's some science to it. I'm sure some of it's just emotional. But at the end of the day, education is the goal. Appropriate education is the goal. And as parents, you have to take ownership in that. I get very involved with what my child learns in school, and I want to know, and I read all the stuff. And
how old is your child?
5.
Oh, okay.
And I've actually, even now, well, he'll be 6 in September. But
he's in kindergarten or
pre-K.
Oh, okay.
He's in reform pre-K.
Yes, he's in reform pre-K.
For those that have gone awry.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But I've actually pushed back on some of the things that he's already learned.
Oh.
Where I've sent stuff into the teacher, and I'm like, no, this is why you're wrong. So,
on his colors? Like, what is it? What are you pushing back on for a 5-year-old?
Part of the issue that I did have is they're pushing too much on the education side, and they're losing the social aspect side. I think I'm a big believer that young kids need to learn to deal with other people, learn respect, etc., but learn how to be human beings. And they're already having him do math at a level that I was doing in 3rd grade, but it's all just jammed down your throat. It's all homework packets. It's all this. It's all that. And my first thought was, if you're going to have a kid enjoy school, why are you going to work him to the bone when he's 5?
Right.
And I'm very lucky that my son has done very, very well in his first year, way better than we ever thought he would, only because he's my son. But I push back on some of that stuff, and then just some of the rules and stuff like that, the everybody wins mentality. And I was just
the participation trophy kind of idea.
I was just explaining to Rosalind Ross, the author who wrote great kids books on essentially how to raise your kids to be ready for the world. Is I've had an argument with the teacher about the mutual discipline aspect of things. Well, if one kid starts a fight, both kids get suspended. I mean, that's the new trend. And I said to the teacher, I said, I don't understand this because you're supposed to be preparing children for the world.
Right.
And that's not how reality works.
Right.
If somebody beats up somebody else, the police don't show up and arrest both people and go to jail.
That's right.
So you're setting a false standard.
Right.
And
it's an equality standard, right? It's just divorce from personal responsibility.
Yes.
It says everyone should get treated the same, even if one guy, like, out of the blue punches someone else in the back of the head and the other kid just then responds, they're treated the same.
But it further goes to show you how public schools are so bizarre and how the rules have changed, and it's being run on emotion versus what it should be run on, which is the facts, history, and the things that our children actually need to survive. I'll take care of the emotions at home.
Well, why not, Sean? The great, the average, and the weak teachers are all paid the same. Why not treat the good and the bad kids the same?
You see how we dovetailed that back nicely? That was amazing.
I kind of like that concept. I get paid the same.
Bob Bowden, thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime, Sean.
And we'll see you next year.
I'll be here next year. I'm not sure I'll be this sober next year. We'll try and see what happens.
You know what? Next year, come on later in the evening when we're drinking, because we usually start drinking on our late night stuff.
Yeah.
And that'll be a blast, my friend.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks.
Live from the floor of Freedom Fest 2016, Las Vegas, Nevada. You listen to the SHR Media Network.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.